The snowflakes fell like whispered prayers across the Arizona desert, each one a miracle in a land that knew only scorching heat and dust. And Vernon Easton stood on the platform of Tucson Station, watching the iron beast that had brought winter to his doorstep hiss and shudder to a stop. He had expected many things when he placed that advertisement in the Boston newspaper 6 months ago, but snow had not been one of them. Neither had the woman now stepping carefully down from the passenger car, her dark wool traveling dress dusted white, her gloved hands clutching a worn carpet bag, as if it held everything she owned in this world. Vernon found himself unable to move, his boots rooted to the weathered planks beneath his feet, as he watched her search the sparse crowd with wide, uncertain eyes. She was younger than he had imagined from her letters, perhaps 23 or 24, with auburn hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet and a face that bore the pallor of eastern winters rather than the bronze of desert sun. "Miss Reynolds." His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by years of shouting orders across cattle drives and eating dust on the open range. Natalie Reynolds, her gaze found him, and something flickered across her expression that he could not quite name. Relief, perhaps, or maybe resignation. She nodded once, her chin lifting with a determination that seemed at odds with the trembling of her hands. "Mr. Easton, I am pleased to make your acquaintance." The formality of her words hung between them like the snow that continued to fall, defying every natural law that governed this harsh territory. Vernon closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, reaching for her bag before remembering his manners and touching the brim of his hat instead. "Welcome to Tucson, Miss Reynolds. I apologize for the weather. This is the first snow we have seen in near 20 years. It followed me from Boston, I think." She offered him a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I seem to carry winter wherever I go." There was something haunting in those words, something that made Vernon want to ask questions he had no right to voice. Instead, he gestured toward the wagon he had parked near the station, its bed lined with blankets he had borrowed from the ranch specifically for this occasion. "The ride out to my place takes about an hour. I brought extra covers in case the cold proved too much." She followed him without protest, her steps careful on the snow-dusted ground. Vernon noticed she wore good boots, sturdy leather that had seen better days but still held together with the determination of quality craftsmanship. He noticed other things too, the way she held herself straight despite obvious exhaustion, the slight catch in her breath when the wind picked up, the absence of any jewelry save for a simple cross at her throat. She climbed into the wagon seat with minimal assistance, settling her skirts around her with practiced efficiency. The journey began in silence, the horses stepping cautiously through the strange white landscape that transformed the familiar desert into something alien and dreamlike. Vernon kept his attention split between the road and the woman beside him, hyper-aware of every shift in her posture, every small sound she made. He had lived alone for the better part of 30 years, since his father died and left him the ranch at the age of 19. The presence of another person in his immediate space felt both foreign and oddly comforting. "Your letters mentioned you worked in a textile mill," he said finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer. "That must have been difficult work." "It was honest work." Her reply came quickly, defensively. "I was grateful to have it after my father passed. I did not mean to suggest otherwise." Vernon adjusted his grip on the reins, choosing his next words with care. "I only meant that it must have been hard on you. Long hours, poor conditions. I have heard stories." Natalie turned to look at him properly for the first time since they left the station, her hazel eyes studying his face with an intensity that made something shift in his chest. "Why did you choose me, Mr. Easton? Your advertisement surely attracted many responses. I cannot imagine I was the most suitable candidate. The honesty of her question deserved an equally honest answer. Vernon guided the horses around a particularly deep drift before responding. Your letters were different. The others, they wrote about what they wanted, what they expected. You wrote about what you could give. You spoke of making a home, not just finding one. That mattered to me. I see. She looked away, back toward the endless white expanse that surrounded them. I hope I can live up to your expectations. I hope I can live up to yours. The words came out before he could stop them, carrying more vulnerability than he had intended to reveal. I am just a rancher, Miss Reynolds. I work with my hands. I smell of horses and cattle more often than not, and my home is simple. I cannot offer you the culture or society you knew in Boston. Boston held nothing for me but memories and grief. Her voice had gone soft, barely audible above the crunch of wheels through snow. I came west looking for something new, something real. If you can offer me that, Mr. Easton, then you have already exceeded any expectation I might have held. The landscape began to shift as they climbed into the foothills, the saguaros standing like sentinels mantled in white, the rocky outcroppings transformed into sculptures of ice and stone. Vernon's ranch sprawled across a valley between two ridges, 3,000 acres of grazing land, fed by a spring that never ran dry even in the worst drought years. The main house came into view as they crested the final rise, a low adobe structure with a covered porch and shuttered windows, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin gray line. I have kept the fire going since dawn, Vernon said, guiding the horses toward the hitching post near the front door. The house should be warm. I put fresh linens on the bed in the spare room and cleared space in the wardrobe for your things. Natalie's head turned sharply toward him. The spare room. He felt heat rise in his face despite the cold. I thought you might appreciate some time to settle in before we formalize our arrangement. I am not the sort of man who would rush you into something you were not ready for. The relief that washed over her features was unmistakable, and Vernon felt a complicated mixture of satisfaction and disappointment at her reaction. He had been truthful in his letters about his intentions, about wanting a partner rather than simply a woman to warm his bed and cook his meals. But seeing physical proof of her gratitude at his consideration drove home just how uncertain and vulnerable her position truly was. She had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger based on nothing more than words on paper and the desperate hope for a better life. The least he could do was treat her with the respect and patience she deserved. The next hours passed in a flurry of domestic activity that felt strange and new to Vernon after so many years of solitary existence. He showed Natalie through the house, pointing out the kitchen with its iron stove and pump that brought water directly from the well, the sitting room with its worn furniture and shelves lined with books, the 2 bedrooms and the small bathing room he had added 3 years prior. She moved through each space with quiet attention, her fingers occasionally reaching out to touch a surface or straighten an object, claiming the environment in small, subtle ways. "You have books," she said, pausing before the shelves in the sitting room. "I did not expect that." Vernon shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Winter nights get long. A man needs something to occupy his mind when the work is done. She tilted her head to read the spines, her expression brightening with genuine interest. "Shakespeare, Dickens, Scott. You have good taste, Mr. Easton." "Please call me Vernon, and I cannot claim credit for the collection. Most of them belong to my mother. She was the educated one in the family, came from back east originally, Philadelphia. Like me then, a woman who traveled west for love." Natalie turned to face him, something warm and hopeful entering her eyes for the first time since her arrival. Did she regret it? Never once, far as I could tell. The memory brought a smile to Vernon's weathered face. She and my father, they had something rare. Something worth building a life around, even in a hard place like this. The afternoon faded into evening, the snow finally tapering off to leave the world blanketed in unprecedented white. Vernon cooked dinner, simple fare of beef stew and cornbread that he had prepared earlier in the day, and they ate together at the kitchen table in a silence that felt less awkward than companionable. Natalie proved to have a healthy appetite despite her delicate appearance, and she insisted on washing the dishes afterward over his protests. "If I am to be mistress of this house, I should begin learning its rhythms," she said firmly, her hands already submerged in the wash basin. "Besides, you have been kind enough to give me time and space. The least I can do is contribute to the household duties." Vernon found himself leaning against the doorframe, watching her work with fascination. There was something mesmerizing about the efficiency of her movements, the competence with which she navigated the unfamiliar kitchen. He had spent so many years alone that he had forgotten what it felt like to share space with another person, to be aware of someone else's breathing and presence in the intimate confines of a home. "Why did you really come west, Natalie?" The question emerged unbidden, softer and more personal than he had intended. "Your letters spoke of opportunity and fresh starts, but there is more to it than that. I can see it in your eyes." Her hands stilled in the water, shoulders tensing beneath the dark fabric of her dress. For a long moment she said nothing, and Vernon thought perhaps he had overstepped, pushed too hard too soon. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was supposed to be married, back in Boston, to a man my father chose, a foreman at the mill where I worked. William Callahan, his name was. He seemed kind enough at first, attentive and proper in his courtship. But after my father died, after the fever took him and left me alone, William changed. He became possessive, controlling. He wanted to move up the wedding date, insisted we marry immediately so he could manage my father's small estate. When I refused, when I asked for time to grieve, he grew angry." Vernon's hands curled into fists at his sides, a protective anger rising in his chest. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically. But he made my life unbearable. He spoke to the mill owners, had me moved to the worst machines, the most dangerous positions. He spread rumors about my character, tried to isolate me from what few friends I had. It became clear that if I stayed in Boston, I would eventually have no choice but to marry him or starve on the streets." She pulled her hands from the water, drying them on a towel with deliberate care. "So I started looking at the Western newspapers, at the advertisements for mail-order brides. And I found yours. I am glad you did." Vernon moved closer, drawn by an impulse he did not fully understand. "You are safe here, Natalie. Whatever else happens between us, whatever we decide about our future together, I give you my word that you are safe in this house. No man will ever make you feel trapped or powerless again." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why would you make such a promise to someone you barely know? Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve better than what you were given in Boston. Because—" He trailed off, searching for words adequate to explain the sudden fierce protectiveness that had taken root in his chest. "Because you brought something with you when you stepped off that train. Something I did not even realize I was missing until I saw you standing there in the snow." "And what was that?" Her voice had gone soft, hesitant, as if afraid of his answer. Vernon reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of auburn hair back from her face. "Warmth. You brought warmth I never knew I needed." The words hung between them like a promise, like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Natalie's breath caught, her lips parting slightly, and for one suspended moment, Vernon thought she might close the distance between them. But then she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself in a gesture of self-protection that was becoming familiar. "I should retire for the evening," she said, her voice unsteady. "The journey was long and I find myself quite exhausted." Vernon nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. "Of course, sleep as late as you need. There is no hurry to rise in the morning." She paused in the doorway, glancing back at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Thank you, Vernon, for your kindness, for your patience, for giving me a chance to find my footing before demanding more than I am ready to give. You do not owe me gratitude for basic decency, Natalie. That should be a given between two people trying to build a life together." He offered her a small smile. "Sleep well." After she disappeared into the spare bedroom, Vernon remained in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the space where she had stood. The house felt different now, charged with a new energy that both excited and terrified him. He had lived alone for so long that he had convinced himself he preferred solitude, that he was content with the simple rhythms of ranch work, and the occasional trip into town for supplies and conversation. But now, after only a few hours in Natalie's presence, he could feel the foundations of that carefully constructed contentment beginning to shift. The following days fell into an unexpected pattern, a delicate dance of proximity and distance as they learned to navigate each other's presence. Vernon rose before dawn as was his habit, tending to the horses and cattle that were his livelihood, while Natalie gradually took over the domestic duties of the household. She proved to be an excellent cook, despite her claims of limited experience, transforming his simple ingredients into meals that reminded him painfully of his mother's kitchen. She mended his worn shirts without being asked, organized the chaotic pantry with ruthless efficiency, and filled the house with small touches that made it feel more like a home than it had in years. The snow melted within days, unable to withstand the returning desert heat, leaving the land muddy and transformed. Vernon took Natalie on walks around the property when his work allowed, showing her the spring that fed their water supply, the corrals where he kept his breeding stock, the small cemetery on the hill where his parents rested beneath simple wooden crosses. She asked intelligent questions about ranch operations, seeming genuinely interested in understanding the work that sustained them, and offered observations that revealed a sharp mind and practical nature. They talked during these walks, sharing stories of their respective pasts in the halting, careful way of people learning to trust. Vernon told her about growing up on the ranch, about watching his father break horses and his mother tend her garden in defiance of the harsh climate. He spoke of the cholera outbreak that took both parents within days of each other when he was 19, leaving him suddenly alone and responsible for 3,000 acres and 200 head of cattle. He described the hard years that followed, the mistakes he made learning to manage the ranch, the loneliness that became his constant companion. Natalie listened with an attention that felt like a gift, her eyes never leaving his face as he spoke. In turn, she shared more about her life in Boston, painting a picture of a city girl raised in modest circumstances by a widowed father who worked himself to death in the mills. She spoke of books borrowed from the public library, of walks along the harbor on rare days off, of dreams of traveling beyond the narrow confines of her immigrant neighborhood. Her father had come from England seeking opportunity, and though he never found wealth, he had given his daughter an education and a fierce determination to make something of herself. "He would have liked you," she said one afternoon as they stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, the wind tugging at her bonnet strings. He always said a good man was measured by his actions, not his words. You are the sort of person he respected, Vernon. Someone who does what needs doing without complaint or expectation of praise. Vernon felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. I wish I could have met him. Any man who raised a daughter like you must have been remarkable. She turned to him with a smile that transformed her entire face, chasing away the shadows that too often lingered in her eyes. Shall we head back? I thought I might attempt an apple pie for supper if you have suitable supplies. We have everything you need. Though I should warn you, I have not had decent pie since my mother passed. You may find my appreciation embarrassingly enthusiastic. Her laughter rang out across the desert, bright and unexpected, and Vernon found himself grinning like a fool. This, he thought, this was what he had been missing. Not just companionship or domestic comfort, but joy. The simple, uncomplicated joy of making another person happy and being made happy in return. 2 weeks after Natalie's arrival, Vernon came in from the range to find her standing in the sitting room holding a photograph he kept on the mantel. It showed a young couple, his parents on their wedding day, stiff and formal in their best clothes but with eyes that shone with unmistakable love. "They look happy," Natalie said softly, not startling at his entrance despite the mud he tracked across the floor. Truly happy, not just putting on appearances for the camera. They were. Vernon moved to stand beside her, studying the familiar image with fresh eyes. I used to wonder how they knew, how they were so certain of each other. They married 3 weeks after meeting, did I tell you that? My father was driving cattle through Philadelphia, met my mother at a church social and proposed before the week was out. Everyone said it was madness, that it would never last, but they proved them all wrong. Natalie set the photograph down carefully, her expression thoughtful. Do you think it is possible for people to know that quickly, to be certain of something so important with so little time? I used to doubt it. I thought it was just a romantic story, something people told themselves to justify impulsive decisions. He paused, weighing his next words with care. But lately, I am beginning to think maybe there is more truth to it than I credited. Maybe when you find the right person, time becomes less important than connection. She looked up at him, and something passed between them in that moment, something wordless and profound. Vernon became acutely aware of how close they stood, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes, close enough to catch the scent of lavender soap on her skin. His hand moved of its own accord, reaching for hers, and she did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined tentatively, and the simple contact sent a jolt of warmth through his entire body. "Natalie," he began, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "These past 2 weeks, having you here, it has changed everything for me. I know we agreed to take things slowly, to give you time to adjust, but I need you to know that my feelings have already grown beyond what I expected. You are not just a convenience or a solution to loneliness. You are becoming essential." Her breath hitched, her grip on his hand tightening. "Vernon, I am frightened. Not of you, but of how much I have come to care in such a short time. After William, after everything that happened in Boston, I swore I would protect myself better, keep my heart guarded, but you make that impossible. You have shown me nothing but kindness and respect, and I find myself wanting things I thought I had given up on." "What things?" He barely breathed the question, afraid of breaking the spell that held them. "A real marriage, partnership, love." The last word came out as little more than a whisper, but it hit Vernon with the force of a lightning strike. "I want to believe we could have what your parents had, what I see in that photograph, but I am terrified of being wrong again." Vernon released her hand only to cup her face gently between his palms, tilting her head so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, Natalie. I cannot promise I will be perfect. I am a rough man, shaped by hard work and harsh land, and I will inevitably make mistakes. But I can promise that I will never deliberately hurt you, never try to control or diminish you, never give you cause to fear me. You came here looking for something real, and that is exactly what I want to give you, something true and solid and lasting." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, her hands coming up to rest over his. "Then perhaps it is time we stopped dancing around what we both want. Perhaps it is time we made our arrangement permanent. Are you certain? There is no rush, Natalie. I meant what I said about giving you time. I know you did, and that is precisely why I am certain. Any other man might have demanded his rights immediately, might have viewed me as property purchased through correspondence. But you have treated me as a person, as someone whose feelings and comfort matter. That respect has done more to win my heart than any grand gesture or flowery speech could have accomplished." Vernon leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was tender and searching rather than demanding. She responded with a soft sound of surprise and pleasure, her body swaying toward his as if drawn by invisible strings. The kiss deepened naturally, years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection. But Vernon kept it gentle, mindful of her previous experiences, and determined to show her that physical affection could be about giving rather than taking. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Natalie's eyes were bright with wonder. "Oh," she said softly, "I did not know it could be like that." "Like what?" Vernon's thumb traced the curve of her cheek, unable to stop touching her now that the barrier between them had finally broken. "Sweet, safe, like coming home." She leaned into his touch, her trust in that simple gesture meaning more to him than any passionate declaration could have. "When do you want to have the ceremony? I suppose we should speak to the preacher in town, arrange something proper." "As soon as you like." "Tomorrow, if that suits you. I have waited 30 years to find you, Natalie. I see no reason to wait any longer now that you are here." They traveled into Tucson the next morning, the wagon rattling over roads already dried and dusty, despite the unprecedented snow of 2 weeks prior. Natalie wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and Vernon had dug out the suit he kept for funerals and formal occasions. The preacher, a weathered old man who had served the territory since before it was even officially organized, agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon with his wife and the proprietor of the general store serving as witnesses. It was not a grand affair by any measure. They stood in the simple church with its whitewashed walls and rough wooden pews, speaking their vows in voices that trembled with genuine emotion. Vernon slipped his mother's ring onto Natalie's finger, a simple gold band he had carried in his pocket for 2 weeks waiting for this moment. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like a sacred seal on promises made with full hearts. Afterward, they stopped at the hotel restaurant for a celebratory meal, and Vernon could not remember ever enjoying food less or company more. He could barely taste what he ate, too focused on his new wife's face, on the way candlelight played across her features, on the knowledge that she was truly his now in every way that mattered. Natalie seemed similarly distracted, her cheeks flushed with what he hoped was anticipation rather than anxiety. The ride back to the ranch felt simultaneously endless and far too short. Vernon's awareness of Natalie beside him had taken on a new intensity, charged with the knowledge of what awaited them. He had been with women before, fleeting encounters in his younger days when loneliness drove him to seek comfort in the arms of saloon girls and widows, but this was different. This mattered in a way nothing else ever had. He wanted to make it good for her, to erase any bad memories William Callahan might have left, to show her that intimacy between husband and wife could be something beautiful rather than something to be endured. Inside the house, Natalie moved about lighting lamps with hands that shook slightly, and Vernon watched her, waiting for some signal of her readiness. Finally, she turned to him, squaring her shoulders in that determined way he had come to recognize and adore. "I should tell you something before we proceed," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness in her eyes. "William never, that is, we never actually. He wanted to wait until after the wedding, said it would not be proper otherwise. So I have no experience with what is expected tonight." Relief and tenderness washed through Vernon in equal measure. "Then we will figure it out together, with no expectations or pressure. This is about us, Natalie, about joining our lives in every way. There is no right or wrong way to do it as long as we are both comfortable and willing." She crossed the room to him then, reaching up to loosen his string tie with fingers that gradually grew steadier. "Teach me," she whispered. "Show me how it should be between two people who care for each other." Vernon caught her hands, bringing them to his lips. "It should be slow, patient. It should be about learning what brings pleasure, what makes you feel cherished and desired. It should never hurt, never frighten, never be about one person taking from another. Do you understand?" She nodded, her eyes locked on his. "I trust you, Vernon. Show me." What followed was a gradual revelation, a tender exploration conducted in lamplight and whispered endearments. Vernon took his time, undressing her with reverent care, pausing to kiss each new expanse of skin revealed, murmuring reassurances and praise. Natalie's initial shyness gave way to wonder, and then to passion as he guided her through the intimate dance of marriage, showing her with hands and mouth and body that physical love could be generous and mutual. When they finally joined together, her gasp of surprise transformed into a sigh of pleasure, and Vernon felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what it meant to be truly connected to another person. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Natalie's head resting on Vernon's chest as his fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. The night air drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of sage and desert flowers, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote sang to the moon. "Are you all right?" Vernon asked softly, needing to hear her confirm what his instincts suggested. Did I hurt you?" Natalie tilted her head to look up at him, her expression soft and satisfied. "You were perfect. It was perfect. I finally understand what all those novels were attempting to describe with their purple prose and veiled language." She laughed quietly, the sound vibrating through both their bodies where they pressed together. "I had no idea it could be like that. Thank you for being patient with me." "Natalie, you never have to thank me for that. This is how it should always be between us. Taking care of each other, making each other happy." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "I love you. I know it is soon, probably too soon by conventional standards, but I cannot keep it inside any longer. I love you, and I am grateful every single day that you stepped off that train into the snow." Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, radiant with joy. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first wagon ride when you promised I was safe with you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear those words to believe them. You saved me, Vernon." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was existing before you came, going through the motions of life without really living it. You woke something up inside me that I thought had died when my parents passed. You brought warmth to a cold place, light to the darkness. You are my miracle, Natalie Easton." She kissed him then, deep and thorough, and their conversation dissolved into other forms of communication that required no words at all. When they finally drifted into sleep, as dawn began to paint the sky with shades of pink and gold, they were wrapped around each other completely. Two people who had started as strangers and found their way to something rare and precious. The seasons turned as seasons do in the desert, the brutal heat of summer giving way to the relative cool of autumn, and then to the brief chill of winter. Vernon and Natalie fell into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease, their partnership strengthening as they faced the daily challenges of ranch work together. Natalie learned to ride, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, and began accompanying Vernon on his rounds of the property. She had a natural way with animals that manifested in the gentle handling of horses and the calm authority she exercised over the cattle. Vernon discovered that having a true partner transformed not just the work but his entire relationship with the land. Decisions that had once fallen solely on his shoulders became discussions. Problems were solved through collaboration, and successes were celebrated together. Natalie proved to have a head for numbers that far exceeded his own, and she took over the account books with enthusiasm, organizing their finances in ways that revealed opportunities for expansion and efficiency he had never considered. But it was not all work and practicality. They made time for joy, for long evenings reading aloud to each other from the books that lined the sitting room shelves, for dancing in the kitchen to music only they could hear, for lazy Sunday mornings spent tangled in each other's arms without any urgency to rise. Vernon taught Natalie to shoot, wanting her to be able to protect herself during the long hours when his work took him far from the house, and the sight of her competently handling a rifle sent a surge of pride and admiration through him that had nothing to do with conventional notions of femininity. Natalie planted a garden in the spring, determined to coax vegetables and flowers from the stubborn desert soil the way Vernon's mother had done. She studied the old woman's journals, learning which plants could tolerate the heat and how to maximize the limited water available. And soon the area behind the house burst into improbable life. Vernon would come in from long days of labor to find fresh tomatoes on the table, squash and beans prepared in ways that made his mouth water, and the occasional bouquet of wildflowers in a jar that made the simple house feel like a palace. They talked about children, tentatively at first and then with growing excitement. Natalie wanted a family, wanted to fill the empty bedrooms with life and laughter, and Vernon found himself dreaming of a son or daughter to carry on the legacy of the ranch. When Natalie missed her monthly courses 2 months into their marriage, they held their breath and waited, hope and fear warring in equal measure. But the bleeding came, heavy and painful, and they grieved together for the possibility that had slipped away. "There will be other chances," Vernon murmured into her hair as she cried against his chest. "We have time, Natalie. We have all the time in the world." But the months passed without another pregnancy, and Vernon could see the frustration and disappointment building in his wife, despite her attempts to hide it. She threw herself into work with almost frantic energy, taking on more and more tasks as if she could prove her worth through sheer productivity. He tried to talk to her about it, to reassure her that her value had nothing to do with producing heirs, but she deflected his concerns with false brightness and subject changes. The breaking point came on a scorching day in July when Vernon found her collapsed near the garden, unconscious from heat exhaustion and dehydration. Terror unlike anything he had ever known seized him as he carried her into the house, laying her on their bed and frantically working to cool her overheated body with wet cloths and careful sips of water. When she finally came around, confused and weak, he made her promise to be more careful, to not push herself so hard in pursuit of some impossible standard. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" he demanded, his fear translating into anger he immediately regretted. "You work from dawn until midnight, you barely eat, you push yourself until you collapse. What are you trying to prove, Natalie?" She turned her face away, tears sliding silently down her temples. "I need to be useful. I need to contribute something of value. If I cannot give you children, if I cannot even manage that most basic function, then I need to be worth keeping for other reasons." Vernon felt like she had struck him. "Is that truly what you think? That I only value you for what you can produce? That my love is somehow conditional on you bearing children?" He caught her chin gently, turning her face back toward his. "Natalie, look at me. Really look at me and hear what I am saying. I love you. You, the person, not what you can or cannot do for me. Children would be wonderful, but they are not essential to my happiness. You are essential. Your health, your well-being, your presence in my life. That is what matters." "But the ranch needs an heir," she protested weakly. "Someone to carry on after you are gone. That is the whole point of marriage, is it not? Building something that outlasts us. The ranch is land and cattle and buildings. They only matter because they represent a life, our life together. If we never have children, we can leave it to a relative or sell it or donate it to the church for all I care. But I cannot replace you, Natalie. There is no substitute for what we have built together. Please, please stop measuring your worth by standards that have nothing to do with what actually makes our marriage strong." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception or hidden resentment. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded, some of the terrible tension draining from her body. "I am sorry. I let my fears get the better of me. William used to say that a woman's only value was in her ability to produce sons, and I suppose some part of me internalized that poison." "William was a fool and a bully," Vernon said flatly, "and he does not get to have any power in this marriage, not even in your thoughts. Promise me you will stop torturing yourself over something neither of us can control. If we are blessed with children, wonderful. If not, we will build a different kind of legacy. Either way, we do it together without you working yourself into an early grave." She managed a watery smile. "When did you become so wise, Vernon Easton?" "When I married a woman too stubborn for her own good and had to figure out how to keep her alive despite her best efforts." He kissed her forehead, then her closed eyelids, tasting salt. "Rest now. No arguments. Doctor's orders, and I am officially appointing myself doctor since the nearest real one is 2 days' ride away." Natalie did rest, reluctantly at first, and then with growing acceptance as exhaustion claimed her. Vernon sat beside the bed as she slept, watching the rise and fall of her chest, overwhelmed with gratitude that he had found her in time. The thought of losing her, of this house returning to the cold, empty place it had been before her arrival, was unbearable. She had become so woven into the fabric of his existence that he could no longer remember how he had survived without her. That crisis marked a turning point in their marriage. Natalie stopped trying to be perfect and started simply being present, working hard but within reasonable limits, accepting Vernon's help and support without viewing it as evidence of her inadequacy. They grew even closer through her vulnerability and his steady devotion, learning that true intimacy came not from hiding weaknesses, but from trusting another person to see them and love you anyway. And then, just when they had made peace with the possibility of remaining childless, Natalie began experiencing the telltale signs that caught them both by surprise. The missed courses, the morning nausea, the exhaustion and heightened emotions. This time, the symptoms persisted, and when the doctor from Tucson confirmed what they had hardly dared hope, Vernon and Natalie clung to each other with joy and terror in equal measure. The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie suffered from terrible sickness that lasted well beyond the first few months, losing weight despite Vernon's best efforts to tempt her appetite. She developed strange cravings for foods that made no sense and equally sudden aversions to things she had always enjoyed. Her body ached and swelled in ways that made her uncomfortable and self-conscious, despite Vernon's constant reassurances that she had never been more beautiful to him. But through it all, through the discomfort and fear and uncertainty, they held on to each other and the dream of the life they were creating together. Vernon became fiercely protective, hovering over Natalie in ways that sometimes annoyed her but more often touched her deeply. He took over most of the heavy work, hired additional help from town despite the expense, and spent his evenings reading to her from novels and poetry as she rested with her feet elevated on pillows. They prepared the second bedroom as a nursery, Vernon building a cradle from mesquite wood he had been saving for a special project. Natalie sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands flying over the fabric with practiced skill learned in the Boston mills. They argued good-naturedly about names, unable to agree on anything for weeks, until Natalie suggested they wait and see what seemed to fit once the baby arrived. When Natalie's pains began on a crisp autumn morning, Vernon sent their hired hand racing to town for the midwife, while he stayed with his wife, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement as the contractions intensified. The midwife, a competent Mexican woman named Rosa who had delivered half the babies in the territory, arrived in time to take charge of the situation with calm authority. She banished Vernon from the bedroom over his protests, insisting that men only got in the way during labor. Vernon paced the sitting room for hours, flinching at every cry from behind the closed door, terrified and helpless in equal measure. This was the one thing he could not fix or control, the one battle Natalie had to fight without him, and the powerlessness was agony. He prayed more in those hours than he had in the entirety of his adult life. Bargaining with God and making promises, he had every intention of keeping if only his wife and child survived. When a thin, furious wail finally split the air, Vernon froze mid-stride, his heart hammering against his ribs. Rosa emerged moments later, her weathered face split in a wide smile. "You have a son, Vernon Easton, a big, healthy boy with good lungs, and your wife, she did beautifully, tired but well. You may go in now." Vernon barely heard the rest, already pushing past the midwife into the bedroom where Natalie lay propped against pillows, her hair plastered to her head with sweat, and her face drawn with exhaustion but alive, gloriously alive and smiling. In her arms, wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn, was the smallest person Vernon had ever seen, red-faced and furious at this sudden ejection into the cold, bright world. "Vernon, come meet your son." Natalie's voice was hoarse but filled with wonder. "Come see what we made." He crossed the room on shaking legs, lowering himself carefully onto the edge of the bed. Natalie shifted the bundle toward him, and Vernon reached out with trembling hands to accept the precious weight. The baby squirmed and fussed, tiny fists waving, and Vernon felt something fundamental shift in his chest as he looked down into the scrunched face of his child. "He is perfect," he breathed, unable to find more adequate words. "Natalie, he is absolutely perfect, and so are you. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. You are incredible." She laughed weakly, reaching up to touch his face. "We did it. We actually did it. We have a family, Vernon. A real family. We always were a family from the moment you said yes to marrying me. But this, yes, this is pretty spectacular too." He carefully transferred the baby back to Natalie's arms, needing to touch them both to assure himself they were real and safe. What should we call him? We never did settle on a name. Natalie studied the baby thoughtfully. What was your father's name? You have never told me. James Easton. Vernon felt his throat tighten with emotion, though he went by Jamie most of his life. Then James it is. James Vernon Easton, named for two good men. She smiled down at the baby, who had finally quieted and was making small sucking motions with his mouth. You think your father would have approved? He would have loved you, both of you. And my mother would have been beside herself with joy at having a grandson to spoil. Vernon kissed Natalie's forehead, then the baby's downy head. Thank you. For this, for everything. For taking a chance on a lonely rancher's advertisement in a Boston newspaper. For bringing light and life to this place. For giving me more happiness than I ever thought possible. Thank you for being exactly who you promised to be in your letters, Natalie replied softly. For treating me with respect and kindness. For loving me in ways I never knew existed. For building this life with me. Her eyes drifted closed, exhaustion catching up with her now that the ordeal was over. Stay with us while we sleep. There is nowhere else I would rather be. Sleep, my love, I will watch over both of you. Vernon sat vigil through the night, unable to look away from his wife and son as they slumbered in the lamplight. The house that had been so silent and empty for so many years now held the sounds of new life. Soft breathing and occasional snuffles that filled his heart to overflowing. He thought about that snowy day 2 years ago when he had stood on the train platform and watched Natalie step into his life, never imagining how completely she would transform everything. She had brought warmth, yes, but so much more than that. She had brought hope and purpose and joy. She had taken his simple existence and turned it into something rich and meaningful. She had given him the family he had secretly craved but never believed he would find. And in return, he had offered her safety and respect and a love that would endure whatever trials the future might hold. The years that followed were full and good, marked by the ordinary struggles and triumphs of any frontier family. Young James grew strong and quick, developing his mother's bright mind and his father's steady nature. He learned to ride almost before he could walk, trotting around on a gentle pony while Vernon worked the cattle, and Natalie tended to the endless tasks of household and ranch management. When James was 3, Natalie found herself pregnant again, and this time the process was easier, her body knowing what to expect. She gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah after Vernon's mother, a tiny, delicate creature who nonetheless proved to have a will of iron from her earliest days. Sarah adored her older brother and followed him everywhere on chubby, unsteady legs, determined to keep up with his adventures no matter how many times she tumbled. Vernon expanded the ranch over these years, buying adjacent land when it became available and increasing their herds. The work was hard but satisfying, made bearable by the knowledge that he was building something to leave his children, a legacy that would provide for generations to come. But more than land or cattle, he and Natalie were creating a different kind of inheritance, modeling for James and Sarah what a marriage built on mutual respect and genuine love looked like. They were teaching their children that strength came in many forms, that vulnerability was not weakness, that true partnership meant supporting each other through both triumphs and struggles. On the 10th anniversary of Natalie's arrival, Vernon woke before dawn and slipped from the bed carefully to avoid disturbing his sleeping wife. He dressed quietly and made his way outside, climbing to the ridge that overlooked the valley where their home stood. The stars were just beginning to fade, giving way to the promise of sunrise, and the air held that perfect crystalline quality that only came in the moments between night and day. He stood there thinking about the journey that had brought them to this place. All the small choices and chance encounters that had aligned to create their life together. If he had not placed that advertisement, if Natalie had not been brave enough to respond, if the snow had not fallen on that unprecedented day, would they have ever found each other? It seemed impossible that two people so perfectly suited could have existed in the world without some force drawing them together. "I thought I might find you here." Natalie's voice came from behind him, and Vernon turned to find her approaching with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. Could not sleep, just thinking, remembering. He held out his arm and she stepped into his embrace, fitting against his side as perfectly as she always had. 10 years ago today, you stepped off that train into the snow. Do you ever regret it? Coming west, marrying a stranger, building this life with me?" She looked up at him with eyes that still held the same hazel depths that had captivated him a decade ago, though they were now marked with laugh lines and the wisdom that came from years of true partnership. Not for one single moment. "This life, this place, you and the children, it is everything I never knew I needed. Everything I dreamed of but did not believe actually existed. I told you that first night that you brought warmth I never knew I needed," Vernon said softly. "That has only become more true with time. You are the center of everything, Natalie, the heart of this home and this family. My heart." She smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. "And you are mine, always." They stood together on the ridge as the day began. Two people who had started as strangers brought together by correspondence and circumstance, who had chosen each other over and over again through all the challenges and joys of building a life from nothing. Below them, the ranch was beginning to stir, smoke rising from the chimney as the hired hands started their day, chickens pecking in the yard, cattle moving in the distant pastures. This was their kingdom, small and simple by the standards of Eastern society, but infinitely precious because they had created it together. Every fence post and water trough, every planted seed and newborn calf, every room in the house and piece of furniture carried the mark of their combined effort and shared dreams. And at the center of it all was love, the kind of deep, abiding love that transformed work into purpose and hardship into opportunity. They descended the ridge hand in hand as full daylight spread across the land, returning to the house where their children would be waking soon, demanding breakfast and attention, and all the small moments that comprise the actual substance of daily existence. There would be work to do, endless and unchanging, but also laughter and small kindnesses, and the comfort of partnership that made every burden lighter. Vernon held the door for Natalie as they entered the house, watching her move through the familiar space with the confidence of someone who knew herself to be exactly where she belonged. She had brought winter's snow to the desert, and with it, the promise of new life, of growth and transformation and hope. She had seen potential in a lonely rancher's awkward letters and been brave enough to claim it. And he had recognized in her words the echo of his own unspoken longing, the desire for something real and true and lasting. Together, they had built exactly that, a love story that would endure long after they were gone, preserved in the legacy of their children and the land they had shaped with their labor and devotion. The years continued to unfold, bringing all the expected markers of a life well lived. James grew tall and capable, learning everything Vernon could teach him about ranching and adding innovations of his own as the territory modernized around them. Sarah proved to have her mother's gift with numbers, and eventually took over management of the ranch's business affairs, her sharp mind ensuring their continued prosperity through economic downturns that ruined less careful operations. Both children married well, bringing partners to the ranch who understood and appreciated the values Vernon and Natalie had worked so hard to instill. Grandchildren arrived in due course, filling the house with noise and energy that reminded the aging couple of their own early years raising a family in the demanding environment of the frontier. Vernon's hair turned silver, and his body grew less willing to handle the physical demands of ranch work. But he found satisfaction in mentoring the younger generation, passing on not just practical skills, but the philosophy that had guided his own life. He taught his grandchildren about the importance of treating people with respect, about the value of hard work tempered with compassion, about building something that would outlast their brief time on earth. Natalie, too, aged gracefully, her auburn hair fading to white but her eyes retaining their characteristic warmth and intelligence. She became the matriarch of not just their family but the broader community, known throughout the territory for her wisdom and generosity. People sought her counsel on matters ranging from crop cultivation to child rearing to questions of the heart, and she gave freely of her time and hard-won knowledge. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the younger generation was occupied with their own concerns, Vernon and Natalie would sit together on the porch they had added years ago, watching the sun set over land that had become as familiar as their own heartbeats. They spoke sometimes, reminiscing about the past or discussing the future, but often they simply sat in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, communicating in the wordless language developed over decades of profound intimacy. "You remember that first snow?" Natalie asked one evening as they watched their grandson attempting to rope a fence post under James's patient instruction. How impossible it seemed, snow in the Arizona desert. Vernon squeezed her hand gently. "I remember thinking you were a miracle, that the universe had somehow conspired to bring me exactly what I needed precisely when I needed it most." "We were both miracles for each other," she replied softly. "Two lost souls who found each other across 2,000 miles and built something neither of us could have created alone." She leaned her head against his shoulder, sighing with contentment. "I am grateful for every single day, Vernon, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones because they taught us what we were capable of together. I love you, Natalie Easton. I loved you that first day on the train platform. I loved you on our wedding night. I loved you when you brought each of our children into the world, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." She turned to kiss him, the gesture familiar after so many years but no less meaningful. "And I love you, my cowboy, my partner, my home." They lived many more years together, growing old but never truly old, aged in body but young in spirit. The ranch thrived under the management of their descendants, evolving with the times while retaining the core values that Vernon and Natalie had embedded in its foundation. The territory became a state, the wild frontier gradually tamed, and the world around them changed in ways they could never have imagined on that snowy day in 1885. But through all the changes and challenges, one thing remained constant: the love between Vernon and Natalie Easton, a love born of chance and choice, nurtured through patience and respect, deepened by shared struggle and triumph. They had promised to build something real together, and they had kept that promise in every way that mattered. When Vernon finally passed at the age of 83, slipping away peacefully in his sleep after a full day spent with his children and grandchildren, Natalie grieved with the depth that only came from losing someone who had been woven into every fiber of your existence. But even in her grief, she found comfort in the life they had built, in the family that surrounded her with love and support, in the knowledge that what they had created together would continue long after both of them were gone. She lived another 5 years without him, years spent sharing stories with the younger generations, ensuring that the legacy of their love and partnership would be preserved and honored. She spoke often of that first meeting, of the snow that fell like a benediction, of the warmth they had brought each other in a land that seemed designed to freeze out softness and hope. And when Natalie finally joined Vernon in the small cemetery on the hill, laid to rest beside him under a simple stone that bore both their names and the dates that bracketed their extraordinary ordinary life, their descendants gathered to celebrate, not mourn. Because the story of Vernon and Natalie was not a tragedy, even though it ended as all stories must. It was a triumph, proof that two broken people could find each other across impossible distances and create something whole and beautiful and lasting. The ranch continues to this day, now in the hands of the 5th generation descended from that unlikely mail-order marriage. The house has been expanded and updated, but the original core remains, the rooms where Vernon and Natalie lived and loved and raised their family, preserved as a testament to their legacy. And on the mantel, in the place of honor, sits that old photograph of Vernon's parents alongside a newer image, Vernon and Natalie on their 50th wedding anniversary. Their aged faces wreathed in smiles, and their hands clasped together with the ease of decades of devotion. Visitors to the ranch often comment on that photograph, on the obvious love and connection visible even in the faded sepia tones. The family members smile when they see people studying it, and sometimes, if asked, they will tell the story of how it all began, of a lonely cowboy and a desperate woman who took a chance on each other when the first snow fell on the Arizona desert, bringing with it the promise of warmth neither had known they needed until they found it in each other's arms.